I never liked alumni meetings. When I was invited to the last one, I hesitated, but finally decided not to be the one who avoids. Besides, it was an opportunity to meet with those I hadn't seen for a long time and close the gestalt. The place was an old, almost abandoned hotel on the outskirts of the city. There seemed to be some New Year's decor, but the atmosphere was still gloomy: low ceilings, dark corridors, creaky stairs. I arrived first. The empty room greeted me with a strange silence. Somewhere in the background, almost invisible, dim lights were pulsating. Half an hour later, others began to arrive. We all looked adults, with our years and lives, but with some strange tension in our eyes. As if this evening was not just a meeting, but a test. Everyone was smiling, but the smiles did not reach the eyes. It was especially strange with Lucy. She was the same girl who everyone once considered the center of our group. At school, she was not liked, but everyone wanted to be her friend. And now, it was like she disappeared into a dark corner of the room, not talking to anyone. At some point, they started telling stories, as they do at such meetings. Oh, everyone was reserved, but the topics began to get stranger and stranger. One of the guys, Sam, suggested playing an old game, Calm or Scary. We had to take turns telling scary stories, and the rest had to guess which of them were true and which were fiction. When it was my turn, I remembered how a couple of years ago one of our classmates, Jasper, disappeared. He was always a little strange. Creepy things happened to him. They said that he saw something beyond this world. After he disappeared, no one ever found him. The story turned out to be pretty banal, but when I finished, the room became noticeably colder. But the creepiest thing began when I noticed that Lucy was gone. I walked down the hall to look for her, and as I was returning to the hall, I heard her familiar voice, as if from behind the door, whispering a name to me. I knew she couldn't be there. The strange feeling was growing. Unable to put it off, I opened the door, but there was no one in front of me. I returned to the hall. Everyone was sitting as if nothing had happened, but there was a shadow of something eerie in their eyes. I looked at my watch, and realized that almost 2 hours had passed, but only 15 minutes had passed since we gathered. I wanted to leave, but a hand stopped me. Thinner than usual. Lucy. She was nearby. I turned around, but she was gone. Only the cold and the shadow behind me. Suddenly I realized that I was the only one left. Everyone else had disappeared. And Lucy's voice whispered in the darkness that we would never leave here. I woke up already in a hospital bed, and the investigator was standing next to me. The detective was grim and looked as if his day had begun yesterday. He looked at me intently, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Can you explain what happened?" he asked, taking out a notebook. I tried to get up, but my body ached as if I had been pulled out of ice water. Everything was mixed up in my head, and I could barely remember the details. We had a high school reunion. In an old hotel on the outskirts of town, I began, trying to speak evenly. People started disappearing. "Lucy," I heard her voice. "Lucy?" He interrupted. "Are you sure she was there?" Of course she was. She even talked to me. "Well, not exactly." Whispered. He looked at me for a long time, and then quietly said, "Lucy couldn't have been there." "Why?" I asked, feeling something unpleasant constricting my throat. The detective took a photograph out of the folder. It was of Lucy. Or rather, what was left of her. The photo had been taken a long time ago, a police report. She looked nothing like I remembered, but her face was familiar. Lucy died 10 years ago. In this very hotel. Missing at her graduation, her body found 3 months later. My heart started pounding. It didn't make any sense. I saw her. I heard her voice, but she was there, I swear. The investigator leaned closer, his voice quieter, almost a whisper. "You're not the first." "What do you mean?" He opened another folder. There were notes, photographs, reports. They all concerned that very hotel. People had disappeared. At different times, under different circumstances. Everyone who returned told similar stories, whispers, friends who had disappeared, strange figures in the shadows. But the strangest thing was that none of those who returned could remember how they left the hotel. Where are the others? The ones who were at the meeting? I asked, even though I knew I didn't want to know the answer. You were there alone. When we arrived, we found you in the main hall. You were sitting on the floor, holding your head and whispering something about Lucy. The world seemed to collapse around me. Everything I remembered, everything I saw, suddenly became shaky, like a dream. It's impossible. I whispered, maybe not, but survivors are always alone, the investigator said, closing the folder. You were lucky to be found. Most are not. His words echoed in my head as he left the room. There was only me, the silence, and the faint hum of medical equipment, and that night, when I tried to sleep, I heard that whisper again. Lucy's voice. It was calling my name, and then I realized that I had never left the hotel. It was supposed to be the perfect Christmas. A snowy holiday in the countryside, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. My family always spent their holidays in my grandmother's house, which stood on the very edge of the forest. She had died long ago, and the house was empty, but this time we decided to go back there to feel the atmosphere of the holidays, solitude and peace. When we arrived, everything was as before, an old house with crooked windows, a dark forest behind it, covered in snow, and the same smell of wood and a fireplace. It was quiet outside, only the wind sang its melancholy song at night. We spent the first couple of days enjoying the fire in the fireplace, playing board games and preparing Christmas dinner. But on the third evening, something went wrong. At first, I noticed strange sounds coming from the attic. It was not the usual creaking of old wood. No. I would say that it was someone's footsteps. A couple of hours later, when my sister and I were returning from a walk, I noticed that one of the window frames in the house was slightly open. We checked everything, but could not find an explanation. Grandma always said that such windows open by themselves at night. I laughed at the time, but now this thought haunted me. Late in the evening, when the whole family had already fallen asleep, I was lying in my room, trying to sleep, when suddenly I felt someone sitting on the edge of my bed. I did not dare to turn over. I did not know what to expect. For a moment the room became colder, and I heard a faint breathing. It was not my breathing. Finally, I could not stand it and opened my eyes. In front of me stood a figure in the shadows, a tall and faceless creature with dark eyes that seemed to reflect all the emptiness of the world. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but the figure suddenly disappeared. The whole room was as usual. The only thing that reminded me of what had happened was the quiet footsteps that I heard behind the door for a long time. The next morning, my sister and I decided to explore the attic, although I didn't want to go there. There was nothing scary there, just dust and old things. But when I opened one of the wooden boxes, there was an old toy inside, in the form of a doll with a sullen face, with red spots on the eyes. My sister and I immediately understood, it was the doll that Grandma always kept in her bedroom. We used to think that she simply forgot about it, but now everything looked different. After we returned to the room, my mother said that at night she heard a strange sound, similar to children's laughter, coming from the basement. And then I became really scared. The basement was always locked, but that day the door was open, as if someone had opened it and was waiting for us to look in. We decided to leave the place closed, but by evening we realized that something was watching us. The night was falling quickly. My sister and I were hesitant about going to bed, but eventually fatigue got the better of us and I fell asleep. I woke up to someone sitting on the edge of my bed again. This time I didn't dare turn over, but I felt the creature coming closer and whispering in my ear, "You shouldn't have come back." Then I remembered how my grandmother always told me that this house kept its secrets, and that anyone who dared to return here would always remain here forever. We left the next morning, and the house remained in the same state. Only the toy in the attic was gone, and the door to the basement was closed again. But I knew that this was not the end. My name is Mike. I am a student who was looking for a way to earn some extra money. I urgently needed money to help my parents, because studying and living in the city require considerable expenses. It happened in winter, at the end of December. The snow fell thickly, covering the streets and houses. The frost penetrated to the bone, and the city looked almost lifeless. The evenings became dark early, and silence seemed to ring in the air. It all started with an ordinary part-time job. My neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, asked me to babysit her son Jimmy. He was only 6 years old, and I urgently needed money. Just feed him, put him to bed and stay the night. "I'll be back in the morning," she said. It sounded simple. When I came into the house, Jimmy was sitting on the couch with a teddy bear in his hands. The boy was too quiet. He just looked at me with his big blue eyes and muttered, "Mom said you're staying with us." For some reason, the word "us" sounded strange, but I decided not to pay attention to it. The house was eerily quiet. Even the old wooden floors creaked too loudly. While I was cooking dinner, Jimmy sat at the table, motionless. His eyes seemed to follow my every move. I tried to joke, ask about his favorite cartoons, but he just remained silent. When it was time to go to bed, I walked him into his room. It looked ordinary: toys, a bed, a nightlight in the shape of a moon. The night was quiet, too quiet. I was lying on the couch, glued to my phone, and imperceptibly fell asleep. Suddenly, A loud sound coming from the kitchen woke me up. My heart pounded. I jumped up and ran there. Jimmy was standing in the kitchen. Around him on the floor lay shards of a broken plate. "Jimmy, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying not to sound scared. He didn't answer, just looked at me with his big eyes. I took him back to the bedroom, put him to bed and returned to the couch. I hoped that the incident was just an accident. I lay down again and tried to sleep, but soon woke up from a strange feeling, as if someone opened the door to the living room. In the semi-darkness, I saw a silhouette. It was Jimmy. He was slowly approaching my bed. Something was shining in his hand. I looked closer and went cold. It was a kitchen knife. "Jimmy, what are you doing?" I asked, feeling cold sweat running down my back. He didn't answer, but seemed to just look at me, as if he didn't realize what was happening. I quickly jumped up, grabbed the knife by the blade and knocked it out of his hand. Blood began to ooze from my palm, but the adrenaline drove me forward. I picked Jimmy up and, despite his resistance, locked him in the bedroom again. When I locked the door, I heard Jimmy start crying behind the door. I called Mrs. Wilson, but she didn't answer. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat on the couch until the morning. When Mrs. Wilson returned, Jimmy was still asleep in his room. I told her everything. She looked worried, but not surprised. "Jimmy sometimes sleepwalks. I'm sorry I didn't warn you," she said. To be honest, I didn't believe her, because it didn't look like sleepwalking. I didn't say anything, just nodded. Since then, I don't take any part-time jobs anymore and avoid the Wilsons' house. Sometimes I still think about that night, and the feeling of anxiety doesn't go away. Maybe it's just nerves, or maybe I'll never understand what really happened. My name is Sam and my wife is Lisa. We recently bought a house in a small town in the eastern United States. It was a great deal, spacious, great location, and a price we couldn't refuse. We didn't even think about why the price was so low, because everything looked perfect. At first, we enjoyed our new home, renovating, decorating the rooms, and getting used to life in a quiet town. However, over time, strange things began to happen. At first, they were small things. The lights would flicker, as if the electricity was playing tricks, and the TV would turn on by itself. We attributed it to old wiring or random power surges. But then we started hearing strange sounds, like someone was walking on the creaky floors in the living room. Although we knew there was no one there, one night, everything got even scarier. We had already gone to bed when I woke up with the feeling that someone was watching us. I opened my eyes and saw a silhouette standing in the bedroom doorway. It was hard to make out the face in the darkness, but the figure seemed tall and still. I tried to wake Lisa, but when I looked at the door again, there was no one there. I thought it might have been a dream, but too many things in this house began to come together to form one eerie picture. A few days later, another strange incident occurred. One morning, I woke up on the floor in the living room, although I had gone to bed in the bedroom. I had never had the habit of sleepwalking, and this worried me greatly. I could not remember how I had ended up there, and for some reason the feeling of anxiety did not leave me all day. We decided to talk to our neighbors to find out more about the house. It turned out that the house had a dark past. A few years ago, a tragedy occurred here. A husband killed his wife, having caught her with her lover. After that, he hanged himself right in the living room. Since then, the house could not be sold for a long time, and its price gradually decreased. Neighbors said that the man's spirit might still be wandering around the house, unable to find peace. This story stuck in our heads. We tried to act rationally and decided to try to fix the situation. We invited a priest to bless the house. For a while, this seemed to help. For almost a week, nothing strange happened. We began to think that everything really had gotten better. One ordinary morning, Lisa got up and went to the bathroom. There she noticed bruises on her body that were not there before. They looked like they had appeared overnight. We were both worried, but tried not to think about the past of this house. In search of a rational explanation, we decided to install a camera in the bedroom to understand what was happening at night. After the first night with the camera, we decided to watch the recording. What we saw scared the living daylights out of us. In the video we saw how I woke up and sat on the bed, got up and walked around it from the side where Lisa was sleeping, and stood there looking at her for 10 minutes. After that, I returned to my place and went to bed. That day I had to leave for work. To be honest, I thought about what I saw on the video all day. I was increasingly visited by thoughts about the past of this house, and about leaving this place. Returning home in the evening, I told Lisa what I was thinking, and what thoughts were bothering me. Lisa decided to support me, saying that I was just tired, and we would cope. But I felt and saw that Lisa was also worried about it, but she tried not to show it. The next night, Lisa woke up again with bruises, but this time they were on her neck, as if she was being strangled. We were horrified and immediately checked the recording from the camera. What we saw made us go cold. In the video, I again woke up in the middle of the night, sat on Lisa and began to strangle her. My movements were mechanical, my face was empty, without emotions. Then I calmly lay down back and continued to sleep until the morning, as if nothing had happened. That was the last straw. We realized we couldn't stay in that house any longer. We packed our things, put the apartment up for sale, and vowed never to look for cheap housing again without a thorough inspection. This house taught us a lesson. Sometimes a low price can hide dark secrets, and the past can remain within the walls, even if everyone thinks it has long been forgotten.